There has been some confusion on the Soft Skill channel recently. Things didn't go exactly as planned, but we will clear that up in the new channel update. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to the channel update Spring 2023. At the beginning of the year, we switched from weekly video releases to a bi-weekly schedule to a video release every second week. However, even according to that new schedule, there supposedly should have been a video in the week before last. However, there was none. I'm very sorry for that. That was some bad luck. I was sick for a while. We didn't manage to get the video produced in time. So in the end, we just didn't have a video to release at that date. And the topic had to be postponed. More about that later. Very sorry for that. The topic, as I said, will come later, but first let's have a brief look at our recent topics, our recent videos. In the weeks since the previous channel update, we had the video about mental load, which was quite an interesting topic. I think we had a nice overview. I discussed the comic by French cartoonist Emma, who initially sparked the discussion. I checked out a German book from a German author about the subject. So I think we got a nice overview, and it is quite an interesting topic, not just in regard to soft skills, but also as a social topic, a social phenomenon. So quite interesting. And yes, somewhat recent topic. It is actually a couple of years old. However, it is in comparison to some of the other older topics we discuss here, it is still rather recent and the discussion is still ongoing. After that, we added another bias to our collection of biases and fallacies, and that was the self-serving bias. Now, that one gave me a bit of trouble when I prepared the video because, as you might recall if you watched that video, the self-serving bias belongs to the family of attribution errors. So when I wrote the script for the video, I wondered, what should I do? Should I treat the self-serving bias strictly as an individual bias without taking other attribution errors into consideration, which would have led to quite a brief and simple video? Or I wondered, should I maybe create a general video about attribution errors and discuss the different varieties, which would have ended up with quite a long and exhaustive video. I think in the end I found a pretty good compromise by providing some context to the self-serving bias, some background information. I think it worked out nicely. And well, after that, the plan was to release the book review of The Managed Heart by Ali Russell Hochschild. However, that was the video that unfortunately had to be postponed. So we now switch to the preview. The plan is to have this video, this book review, the week after the next. So in 2 weeks, this book review will be released. It will be our next video on the channel. Now, after that, plans are still a bit vague. First of all, as I said, I was sick. Now I am better. Things are going better again, and we are trying to catch up and get everything going properly again. Since we switched to the bi-weekly schedule, things should be a lot easier, since that takes away a lot of pressure. So I hope that there will be no other missing videos, that there will be no more cancelled videos in the next couple of weeks. However, I can't guarantee it, but currently I don't expect there to be any more gaps. Now, apart from that, plans are still rather vague. At the beginning of the year, I made a very rough plan, which topics I plan to present in what part of the year, still quite rough and vague. And the plan was to make a more detailed plan in the last couple of weeks. However, as I said, things didn't work out as expected, so I didn't do that. So things are still a bit vague. Now the plan is, my general idea was to discuss the topic of habits. In the next couple of weeks, I have here The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. And I want to do book reviews of those two books, and that is still the plan at this point. Furthermore, I had the idea to pick up the topic of dark patterns again. I mentioned them briefly when we had the book review of Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein. Very briefly summarized, dark patterns are little tricks, for example, in the internet that are used to trick people into setting privacy settings that are to their own disadvantage, to trick people into accepting cookies they don't actually want, trick people into subscribing to newsletters they don't want, things like that. We have dark patterns on the internet, as the examples I just gave, and we also have dark patterns in gaming, especially in mobile gaming. Think of microtransactions where people are tricked into spending money. I wanted to pick this topic up again. My initial plan was to have one video about dark patterns on the internet and one video about dark patterns in gaming. I'm not sure how I will deal with the topic in the end. It will probably be too much to combine it into one video, but I'm still figuring things out. Now, and apart from that, I had planned to present one further bias or fallacy in the next couple of weeks, probably framing, which fits the general topic nicely. And yeah, that again is still the current plan. And finally, I had planned to do one soft skill talk. However, I will probably cancel that one in favor of the book review of The Managed Heart that had to be postponed. So this is the rough general plan. I'm not sure yet how things will turn out in the end, but this is the direction things are probably going in the next couple of weeks. The next channel update will be the channel update summer on June 30th in calendar week 26. I don't have that much else to talk about today. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this channel update, again, given circumstances. One idea I had recently was to use the channel updates for little interesting things I stumbled upon, like interesting articles I read that don't really deserve their own video, that don't provide enough material for an own video, but that are still interesting. And there was one such article I recently stumbled upon about an interesting study at the Harvard University about happiness. Now, if we think about happiness, it's probably another US American university that comes to mind, Yale, because at Yale, Laurie Santos gave a famous lecture about happiness that was quite popular and that she later turned into a popular podcast, The Happiness Lab. You might have heard about that. If you are interested in the topic of happiness, you might want to check it out. It's quite interesting. And now we also have interesting research from Harvard. And the interesting thing is they did a long-term study that is now running for more than 80 years, that they started in 1938. And in 1938, they started with more than 2,000 participants, and they observed them over the years to figure out what makes them happy, what makes them well. And one very interesting result from this study is that our relationships, good relationships, are of great importance. They are way more important than things like financial success, success in your profession, healthy eating and whatnot, that are also considered as important for our happiness and well-being, but relationships are even more important than that. Another interesting point that came up in the article, in the interview with those responsible, was that we often have a somewhat wrong or unrealistic understanding of happiness that is also caused by depiction in the media. Often we have the idea that happiness is something that needs to be achieved like a prize, something I can get due to luck or hard work, something I have to reach and to obtain. And this is not how it works, and it is a somewhat dangerous idea, because I will probably end up thinking, all right, I am here, but the things that would make me happy are over there, out of my reach. I'm trying to get them, but I can't reach them. I can't have them. And so I am unhappy, obviously, because all my happiness is over there and unreachable. And that is a problematic direction to take. So quite an interesting topic. I stumbled upon it in a German article, but I will surely find an English-speaking one for you, and I will link to it in the video description. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about the channel. First of all, I'd like to say a few words about comments. As you might know, currently I am trying to reply to every comment you post under my videos. The channel is rather small, there aren't that many comments, so this is possible to do. And I try to do that because obviously I am quite happy if you post comments, and I appreciate that, so I always try to answer them. Now, it might sometimes take a while for me to get it done, especially lately where I was sick. It sometimes took a week or even more, so it might take a few days, but I still try to answer all the comments. I think sometimes YouTube doesn't, the technology doesn't exactly work as expected. One interesting phenomenon I encountered once or twice is that suddenly in this list of unanswered comments, there is a comment that is supposedly a month old, even though I logged in dozens of times during that month and never saw any new comments. So things don't always seem to work perfectly on the technical side. If you have posted a comment that I have not answered, it is probably something like that. And things are a bit more difficult in regard to replies to comments. So for example, if you post a comment and I answer your comment and then you answer my answer again, you reply to my answer, replies to existing comments are displayed in a different way in my YouTube user interface. They are not as visible, not as exposed as entirely new comments, so the chance for me to overlook them is higher. So if you haven't received an answer to such a comment, it's probably because of that. Sometimes I also won't answer a reply again if I think everything has been said and the conversation is finished. But in such a case, I will still give you that little heart thingy, so you still know that I have read and seen your comment. Finally, I said in the previous channel update that I would discuss monetization in this channel update. Yeah, but obviously I didn't make any progress in that regard recently, so this will come at a later point. I hope things will get going steadily again on the channel and we will manage to return to our regular routine, manage to catch up. I'm quite sorry that this missing video occurred right after we switched to the bi-weekly schedule, where there are fewer videos on the channel anyway, but as I said, it was bad luck and unfortunately turned out that way. So yeah, we hope that things will go steadily again now in the next couple of weeks and months. We will see each other again in the next video. For today, I take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.